Bright QT. Every student matters.
Hello everyone. So let's continue our topic here that we have learned already about the new phase. And in the new phase, we were talking about the communist movement as well as Vietnamese nationalism, right? And in that we talked about Ho Chi Minh. Now he was an important leader or nationalist or revolutionary, as we can say, who started to target the French colonial government as well as the outside powers who were trying to invade. And one of the important names here is Japan, right? So we already have covered this part here. Now students, talking about Ho Chi Minh again, what are we seeing? That after the Second World War, the French had to face Viet Minh. Now here in Second World War, what did we see? That Japan was defeated and it was forced to retreat. From where? From the regions that they were trying to make their base for military operations in Indochina. Correct? So here we see that after the Second World War, when Japan or the Central Axis power has been defeated, now here the French, the colonial government here in Vietnam had to face the Viet Minh. Now what is this Viet Minh? So it was the league that was made for the independence of Vietnam. We already have covered that part, right? So here we see that Ho Chi Minh, he was supported by America while fighting against the Japanese, that we already have learned. In the year 1945, he ended the French-controlled government in Annam under Bao Dai. So here we see that he is also getting the support of America, and as a result of it, in the year 1945, he ended the French-controlled government. Where? In Annam. Now one of the protectorates of Vietnam here, right? He ended this government here, that is Bao Dai government there, right? Again in September 1945, he proclaimed an independent republic of Vietnam. Now here what are we seeing? At first they were fighting the French colonial government, right? Then they had to face a lot of issues. Now there were leaders who had differences of opinions. But here we see that under the leadership of Ho Chi Minh, there was new phase that started in Indochina and in Vietnam as well, right? So here we see that finally there was an independent republic of Vietnam. Now what do we understand by the term republic? Now you know that India is a republic, right? So here republic, it means that people have the supreme power along with the elected representatives. Now in a republic, there is an elected head and they are chosen by whom? By the people of that particular region. So now we see that finally Vietnam is an independent republic, right? He also decided to be autonomous state under the French Union. Now at the center there was the French Union, but here what are we seeing? We are talking about the autonomous state. Autonomous state here, what does that mean? So autonomous means to have the freedom to take decisions, right, in all the affairs. So they wanted to be free, but at the center there was this French Union. Differences among them led to the long battles, and finally Viet Minh, they won a decisive victory at Dien Bien Phu in 1945. Now here we see that now they decided that French Union will be there at the center and they would be the autonomous state, the free states who could take decisions of their own, right? But here we are seeing that there were some differences between the Vietnamese and also the French people, and it led to long drawn battles, and finally it was this battle at Dien Bien Phu, again a difficult name to remember. So in the year 1945, the Viet Minh, they finally won this battle, right? And proclaimed independence. So what happened after that? After that, there was a conference held at Geneva. Now, where is this place, Geneva? It is a city in Switzerland. So finally, a conference was held that was known as Geneva Conference. Why? Because it was held in Geneva, right? So in the year 1954, Vietnam was finally divided at the 17th parallel. Now you can relate it somewhat that how India was partitioned. So India and Pakistan was partitioned through this boundary that is known as the Radcliffe Line, right? The partition did not take place here, but we see that Vietnam was divided at this 17th parallel. The name of the boundary was this 17th parallel, okay? So don't get confused here. Apart from this, now who was to become the Prime Minister, the President here? So Ho Chi Minh, he became the first president of the Independent Republic of North Vietnam. North and South Vietnam has been divided here. South Vietnam was under the Bao Dai government. Okay, still we see that it was under this French government here, right? A court provided for elections to be held in 1956. Now finally, in the year 1956, it was decided that the elections would be held, reuniting North and South Vietnam. At first it was divided, now again they wanted to unite North and South Vietnam. Now France set up independent monarchies in Cambodia and Laos. Now what are we seeing here? That these people, they have occupied their own country. Now what happened with France, who was the colonial government here? So they set up their independent monarchies. So the kings were ruling in these regions. Which regions? Cambodia and Laos. Now ended the French claim to any territory in Indo-China Peninsula. Finally, what are we seeing? Finally, the French people, they had no claims in any territory of Indo-China Peninsula. So they were not going to have their autonomy anymore like they used to have when they were the colonial government in this region. So this is how the whole war ended with, right? And how finally Vietnam, they got their first president, and also how they were divided and the accord was signed to reunite them. Now in 1954, it ended the French colonial rule but led to the beginning of serious involvements of USA in South Vietnam. Here again what we are seeing, that in the year 1954, it ended the French colonial rule, right? Now French had no autonomy there whatsoever in the Indo-China Peninsula. But it led to the beginning of new tensions. Now what were these new tensions? The involvement of United States. In which region? In South Vietnam. Then it led to the Civil War. Now what is the Civil War? Civil War is the war between the civilians, two groups in one country. So here we see that it led to civil war in Vietnam. Bao Dai government was overthrown by a coup, that is sudden or violent overthrow of the existing government. So the violent coup or the sudden overthrow of this government was led by Ngo Dinh Diem. Okay. So these are some of the points that you have to keep in mind here. Now who was he? He was a dictator who killed or imprisoned anyone who had opposed him. Opponents were branded as communists. Now here we see that under him, that is Ngo Dinh Diem, he was a dictator, right? He was a monarch. Now he imprisoned anyone or killed anyone who opposed him. Opposed him, it means that the people who were known as the communist people. And who were these communist people? The followers or the people that were mobilized by Ho Chi Minh, right? He talked about the communist government there, and also he introduced the idea of Marxism and Leninism there. So these things were now quite disturbing in the region of Vietnam. So we can say that things were not quite settled in this region yet. Now let's get to our exercise section here. So let us see what are some of the questions related to this topic here. So in very short answer questions, you will find a question that says, what was the result of Geneva Conference in 1954? So here this is a question asked in very short answer question. Now there were a lot of things that happened in the Geneva Conference, but you can say that in 1954, if you have to answer in one line, you can write that Vietnam was divided along the 17th parallel, right? And if you want to add one more line and you remember the parts that you have learnt here now, we can say that who became the president here? So Ho Chi Minh, he became the president of North Vietnam, and Bao Dai government was there in the South Vietnam. So you can answer this part like this. Again, there is a second question that says, when was the Socialist Republic of Vietnam proclaimed? So finally again, it was in the year 1954 that Vietnam was proclaimed as an independent republic. And I already have told you the meaning of republic. It means that people had the supreme power along with elected representatives. There is an elected head. So that is the difference here. Who are elected by the people living in that region. Now in short answer questions, there is a question, when and where were the French defeated in Vietnam? Again, it was in the year 1954. And where were they defeated? So they were defeated at Dien Bien Phu. So this was a decisive victory for whom? For Vietnam. Against whom? Against French government. So in this part you can write about this section, that in the year 1954 there was this battle between France and Vietnam, and here it happened at Dien Bien Phu, and it was a decisive victory in the favor of Vietnam. Now there is a long answer question here. The question says, describe the events which led to the final exit of French from Indochina. Now students, this is a long answer question. So here you have to write in detail. Now in detail, what does that mean? Here we have to talk about the war with France. Okay. So in war with France, what did we learn? You have to talk about the Second World War, how it impacted Vietnam, because here we see that Ho Chi Minh, he got the support of Americans to suppress the Japanese, as well as he was now fighting against the French government in Vietnam, right? So this is how you have to start your answer. So they were fighting against the French government. They challenged they toppled or they threw the government in South Vietnam in the region that was led by Bao Dai government, as well as there were these long battles fought between France and Vietnam. So you will again mention about the 1954 battle, right? So in 1954, what are we seeing? In 1954, there was this battle at Dien Bien Phu. Okay, you have to mention that as well, and how they were defeated, and finally talk about the Geneva Conference. So this is how you are going to answer this question, that how in Geneva Conference Vietnam was divided along the 17th parallel, French were now setting up independent monarchies in Cambodia and Laos, that finally they had no autonomy whatsoever in the regions of Indochina Peninsula. So this is the whole way to compile this answer here that led to the final exit of French from Indochina.